Basically, this is literally about what's taught in school regarding all that historical information that your favorite YouTubers are constantly talking about. So Senate Bill 3019, that's what we're talking about. Revisionist history has been going on for a long time now. What we could do, it's time to get savage again. Of 1,500 members, this statistical anomaly is mathematical evidence, period. Shalosio Yatzarel. Shalosio Yatzarel. It's your brother, your cousin, your nephew, young Unehiya, reporting live on behalf of the Great Spirit. Ayay, Asher, Ayay. To complete your awakening and to let you know that despite what they told you, your righteousness is an everlasting righteousness and your law is the truth, not theirs. I want you to be able to make a comment. If you want to make a comment, you can, and you can do so the normal way, but you can also record yourself on your phone, make a YouTube short, upload it. As long as it's under a minute long, it'll be a YouTube short. You upload it to YouTube through your normal account, and then you grab that link and you can take it to the Unehiya page, the Unehiya Movement page, and you can share it there with a direct message to the administrator. Share the link. A QR code, we'll put it right here so that you can see it, so that it'll help you get to the Unehiya page. You can use that QR code, or you can use the link in the description box to get to the Unehiya Movement page. Share your link to the administrator for your YouTube short, and with that link, we will then take your YouTube short and feature it in a video. I need all indigenous citizens of the US to not just listen to what I have to say today, but also take action. After you see this video, I'm going to explain what's going on, and then I want you to join the Unehiya movement and share this with anyone who identifies as or gets identified as African American. That's how you take action on this, all right? There's a QR code popping up on your screen for that reason right now, and there's a link in the description that'll take you to the same place. This YouTube channel is directly affiliated with the Unehiya movement, and the reason for that is because I'm not just trying to be another guy talking about who black people are on YouTube. Real talk. Talk is cheap. Action is high value. Right? Okay, so listen. We cannot just sit idly by and watch videos of each other talking about our identity. It's good to understand the truth. Do not get me wrong. It's good to understand the truth. But we need to make our inner standing an outer standing by demanding recognition. And a lot of you probably think that that's not really a realistic option for us, but it is. That's where this bill comes into play. Senate Bill 3019. It's the Native Histories and Cultures Education Act of 2023. Before I unpack that, let me explain why you should even bother listening to me. I'm a career journalist, a news reporter. I covered President Donald Trump's first 100 days for USA Herald. I distilled American news for overseas English-speaking communities in the United Kingdom and South Korea. More recently, I covered political and business news for the Lebanon Democrat and the Nashville Post. I then became a member of the National Association of Black Journalists. I was being considered for a position with USA Today in early 2022, but withdrew from consideration to become a PR specialist for a national addiction treatment company that year because the salary was 50% higher and because my people have a tragically historic and unfair connection to the modern opioid epidemic. I now own and operate a digital marketing and PR firm. I say all this to say public relations, not just public relations, but yeah, public relations and news media, political news coverage are what I do. And I'm intimately familiar with how legislative procedure works, if that makes any sense. and I'm talking at the municipal level, the state level, and federal level, because that was my focus. That was the focus of my coverage in previous jobs. So as far as this bill is concerned, stay with me. As far as this bill is concerned, okay, listen. Democratic Minnesota Senator Tina Smith introduced the bill for its first reading on the floor as of October 4th, 2023. She's the one who replaced former Senator Al Franken of the Al Franken Show in 2018, when he got canceled for sexual misconduct allegations. Upon first reading, this bill was immediately referred to the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. Nothing else has happened yet with this bill, which is a very good thing, because that means we're catching this bill extremely early. The general public has no clue this bill even exists yet, because A, how early we're catching it, but also B, the fact that it's a low priority legislative action in the first place. It's low priority. These things are going to be critical to understand for effective legislative advocacy. Okay, so watch this. So Senate Bill 3019, that's what we're talking about. 3019 would be highly unlikely to ever get news coverage, whether it passed or not, and is highly likely to pass due to having no notable opposition from either party. I'm about to explain the bill itself, but I also want to explain that we're not advocating that it be blocked. We want it to pass, but we want to influence lawmakers to make a small yet massively significant amendment to the bill before it passes. In fact, preferably, for us to have an ideal shot at success, we need to accomplish that before it can get scored by the Congressional Budget Office. This is something that we want to change so that then they can figure out what they're going to do. Then they're going to, by the time they've moved on to a step like that, we're past the Rubicon. So Senate Bill 3019 presents us with a magnificent opportunity to rewrite history. Revisionist history has been going on for a long time now. We could fix it. What we could do, we could actually solve the problem of revisionist history and put the real history back where it belongs. Children could learn the real history in school. Keep in mind, education was what was used, weaponized against us to rob us of our identity. This is our opportunity to fix that. An amendment can be made to the bill if the proper evidence is shown that an amendment is necessary. We have a chance now to make our argument, because the time to make an amendment to the bill is during these deliberative stages. And it's during these same stages that we can appeal to the lawmakers who are actually decision makers on the subject. We can change things using this bill. This bill is just an opportunity for us to make our argument. Now, Senate Bill 3019 updates what the National Museum of the American Indian is obligated to do and provide for the sake of educating grades K through 12 on the histories of Native American nations and their cultures. Why does it matter what the National Museum of the American Indian does? It matters for three key reasons. Firstly, the National Museum of the American Indian produces the base curriculum for teaching Native American histories and cultures in public education nationwide. That base curriculum, as it's called, is literally a federally mandated common core, if you will, for what to teach in public schools about Native histories and cultures. And the director of the National Museum of the American Indian is actually in charge of overseeing the development and provision of that base curriculum. If you haven't seen your kids having to deal with this yet, I'll explain why in a minute. The second reason why this is so critical is because a lot of the research being conducted for the study of Native American histories and cultures is provided one way or another by the National Museum of the American Indian. Study programs at various universities and think tanks are currently conducting all that research with a bias against you that leads to excluding not just the Negro contribution, but more importantly, the Negro origin of Native histories from the traditionally accepted narrative. So they're excluding Negro everything from the mainstream narrative when they do their research, because the body of data and information and resources that the National Museum of the American Indian has informs all that research a certain way, in an exclusive way. So in other words, to sum up my last 2 points, basically this is literally about what's taught in school regarding all that historical information that your favorite YouTubers are constantly talking about. Remember, the mainstream consensus about black people in the United States and Canada who are neither immigrants nor descendants of immigrants is that we're Africans. That gets taught in school today and has been taught in school for many, many generations for obvious reasons. The purpose of Senate Bill 3019 is actually just to update the obligations of the National Museum of the American Indian. They should not be able to update those obligations without adding the requisite obligation to acknowledge who we are. I'm going to address the third reason why it matters what the National Museum of the American Indian does in a minute. But first, we need to address what's missing from that core curriculum and that background information for all that research, because as we all know, there are some very critical data points that we're all deliberately overlooking, and the National Museum of the American Indian needs to incorporate that data into its educational resources. That's what we want. They should not be allowed to update their obligations without adding an obligation to tell the truth about indigenous identity. So check this out. The Slave Voyages database provides estimates for how many slaves went from any point A to any point B based on what research of the transatlantic slave trade has actually verified to date. You can sort those estimates so that you only see disembarkations, which means you're only looking at data pertaining to where slaves landed after actually surviving these voyages. You can also further sort that data by region on your x-axis, while your y-axis remains sorted by years in increments of 25 years from 1501 to 1875. So you end up with rows of total numbers of slaves within a given segment of 25 years and columns for each of the regions in which those slaves landed. That last row at the bottom, if you do this, as I've said, is for total numbers from 1501 to 1875. Basically the entire slave trade, okay? One of those regions will be labeled mainland North America. And when you look at this column's total, the number shown is 388,747. That might surprise a lot of Pan-Africanists and Afrocentrists in our community, and I want to make sure we all understand what that number means. This is the number of how many slaves were successfully brought to mainland North America from Africa over the course of 375 years. I'm going to say that again. This number, the 388,747 that you're looking at, that is the number of slaves. That's how many people were brought as captives, brought as slaves from Africa to mainland North America, period. This is how many people over the course of 375 years. This is the total for that entire period of time. Okay, almost 4 centuries worth of time. Now keep that number in your head, because I also want to show you how many of us were counted on the 1860 census. Remember, when we were just looking at this, we're just now looking at this, and we're seeing the range of time that we just looked at ends at 1875. 1875, right? We're gonna look at the 1860 census. So that would be the census right before the census that's right before that range of time ended. Now I want everybody to remember the Emancipation Proclamation came in 1862. Slavery was abolished in 1865. Okay, so let's look at this. This is this right here, what you're looking at, is a 20th century copy of the original 1860 census, and I'm getting it directly from congress.gov. I'm taking you to page 9 of the introduction, where you'll see a figure entitled Census of Slaves and Free Colored. This is a table displaying Negro population data as of 1860. Don't forget, the slave trade itself had already been outlawed for Britain for decades. by this point. As you can see, this table covers all the US censuses that had been taken so far, because the first US census was in 1790. So we have 3 non-percentage categories. Those non-percentage categories are free colored, slaves, and then free colored and slaves. Right? So we got a free colored column, we got a slaves column, and then we got a column for combining free colored with slaves. As of 1860, there were 487,970 free coloreds, but there were also just shy of 4 million colored slaves. And that gives you a total of 4.4 million colored people, slave and free. Now compare that number to the 388,747 slaves counted coming from Africa. What we have right here, what we've just demonstrated, is a large data disparity between the numbers for slaves from Africa and for coloreds in mainland North America. The disparity in question is that 388,747 slaves from Africa over the course of 350 years only accounts for 9.8% of the 3,953,760 black slaves counted in 1860. A blaring incongruity only exacerbated further by the fact that at least half of that 388,747 captives from Africa died during those 350 years leading up to 1860. This statistical anomaly is mathematical evidence that strongly suggests the so-called African American demographic doesn't actually descend from those captured in Africa. The phenotype of this demographic also cannot be attributed to any groups from the African continent, because to assume that less than 10% of our population genetically determined the skin color, hair texture, facial features, and body proportions of the other 90% is tantamount to the tail wagging the dog. Therefore, it's only logical to deduce next that we are predominantly indigenous to the Americas. Why? Because there is no data available on how else we would have gotten here. You can't blame white America for lying to you about your identity either, because the information is available right here. It's publicly accessible, and all you have to do is look it up. Census data comes directly from the government, and the Slave Voyages database is an interdisciplinary multinational project sponsored primarily by the National Endowment for the Humanities. It involved several institutions, including the Emory Center for Digital Scholarship, the Hutchins Center of Harvard University, the University of California, Irvine, and the University of California, Santa Cruz. The website is also hosted by Rice University. All of these are trustworthy institutions, so our sources are solid. I'll do more videos to explain how and why the Negro identity has become so complex. But I want us to focus right now on this issue we're talking about and how it pertains to the bill that I'm talking about. Okay, let me finally give you the third reason why it matters what the National Museum of the American Indian does. Historically speaking, 2 societal institutions were leveraged against us to cause the erasure of Negro identity. All right, 2 societal institutions are most responsible for the erasure of Negro identity: marriage and education. I'll go into more detail on all of this in future videos, especially marriage, but the point is, we were educated out of our identity.
Some slaves were good workers and very obedient. Many took pride in what they did and loved their cabins and the plantation as if they actually owned them. Others were lazy, disobedient, and sometimes vicious. I wonder what kind of slave I would have been. I wonder if I would have been one of those lazy slaves who just were not willing to work for nothing, or disobedient because I just didn't want to be a slave.
We were taught to hate dark complexion, too. We were taught that darkness is synonymous with evil. We were taught to disavow Unehiya or Wakantanka and embrace God instead, and his son, Jesus instead. Most pertinently, I don't want to say most importantly, but most pertinently, we were taught that we were brought here from Africa, and we were threatened against identifying as American Indians. In fact, during slavery and early abolition, we were denied any education at all. We eventually embraced African identity in a vain attempt to escape all the stigma attached to our Black Indian identity. Mind you, Native Americans were calling us African. Over time, we began to believe the lie. Native Americans are actually our mixed descendants with Europeans. And because they've been mixing with whites for so many generations, they no longer resemble the original phenotype. They also endured so-called Indian boarding schools, for which their children were often kidnapped and forcibly educated to forget who they were. That was the whole point. So you can't even fully blame the Native American for calling us African. That was a problem that they did that, but also they were forced to forget who they were, and by forgetting who they were, they forgot who we were. This only perpetuated a then growing sense of separation between mulattoes, who we now call Native Americans, and dark-skinned Indian kinfolk that they come from, who we now call African Americans, which is just a misnomer. So the same way education and the lack thereof has been weaponized against indigenous identity, we need to now weaponize it against harmful historical narratives. We need to beat people over the head with the truth. The history of revisionist history among conservatives is convoluted and prolix. By now you know this.
Just look what happened a few weeks back when the president, in the midst of nationwide Black Lives Matter protests, announced plans to hold a rally in Tulsa on June 19th, a decision astonishingly tone deaf for two key reasons.
Next Friday, June 19th, is Juneteenth, an annual holiday commemorating the end of slavery in the U.S. As for Tulsa, 99 years ago this month in 1921, the city witnessed the Tulsa Race Massacre, one of the nation's worst outbreaks of racial violence, recently portrayed in HBO's Watchmen.
Now, the reason they're mentioning Watchmen there is a lot of Americans learned about the Tulsa Race Massacre for the very first time, nearly a century after it happened, from watching that show. Basically, the night that episode aired, many white Americans went, "Holy shit, I had no idea this happened."
This also comes at a time that is rife with revisionist history, especially from the right. We are seeing that conservatives are torn over what the Civil War was really about. They're unsure. Well, as it so happens, the history associated with the Civil War, which apparently is debatable, can very much factor into this very conversation. The descendants of slaves have a hidden identity, and that identity needs to be revealed. We need to be able to discuss who we really are, all right? And we need our cousins, we need Native Americans to do their part in telling the truth. And Senate Bill 3019 is an opportunity to do that. The purposes of the bill directly open the door for an amendment because what we're proposing perfectly fits the description of those stated purposes. However, we have to do this right, all right? Listen to me. We have to do this right. There are a lot of ways to fail and very few ways to be successful. The Unehiya Movement needs a strong base of 1,500 members, all of whom should be U.S. citizens who signed the petition on the page I mentioned earlier. Once again, here's the QR code for that, and the link to it is in the description box below too. They also need people to volunteer for several things. For example, they need someone willing to be interviewed about basically about being ostracized by friends and family for identifying as Indian, which is probably all of you. They need people to interview about the harm done by misinformation from 23andMe and Ancestry.com's genetic arm. They need full service web development for all the information that's going to be presented to Senator Tina Smith and others, as well as the representatives of the states to which this bill applies. We don't do pamphlets anymore, and we don't do letters in 2023, 2024. You got to make an entire informational website for a lawmaker's staff to look through these days. This also brings me to why a lot of you might be saying, I haven't seen any of this Indian curriculum coming home with my kids. The curriculum in question is currently only in use in 12 states: Arizona, Connecticut, Florida, Hawaii, Maine, Minnesota, Montana, New Mexico, Oregon, Virginia, Washington, and Wisconsin. Obviously, a long-term goal would be to help proliferate the curriculum across the rest of the country, but even still, that's a quarter of the nation right there. This matters whether you live in those states or not, because this stuff shapes a lot of how 25% of Americans think about autochthonous identity, and that's what we need to reclaim. The Unehiya Movement needs members in all 12 of those states. And that doesn't necessarily mean, listen to me, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to physically be somewhere, go somewhere to do anything. They need to be able to tell representatives and senators that the movement has constituents in their congressional districts, right? So at the very least, that's what they need. That's another reason why we all need to be supporting this. Join the Unehiya Movement. If they call you, listen, if they call you an African American, but you know you're indigenous because you've done your genealogical research, join the movement. Sign the petition, become a member, and help us build the database that's going to clearly inform legislators about what the National Museum of the American Indian needs to add to the curriculum it uses to educate the public about Aboriginal histories and cultures. Let me also say that I know a lot of my people are very skeptical about the idea that we can effect change when it comes to government action. Many of you believe you don't have a voice and that the Illuminati controls all of this, whether it be Freemasons or the Jewish community, blah, blah, blah. Election season is the perfect time for us to be attempting exactly this, because as it so happens, you have considerable voter power. We as a people represent a significant voter base. Election season is upon us. There's a lot of people vying for hegemony with the black vote. There are a lot of reasons why we need to game that, because we're not being served in a lot of key areas, and that needs to stop. We need to fix that. We need to compel all these politicians to do the right thing. They won't just do it. Politics ain't Nike. We gotta make them do what they're supposed to do. And right now, as a matter of fact, the Democratic Party is vulnerable to this exact argument, because they know they haven't done enough for black people. They know they made specific promises that they are now stringing us along on, reparations being the first to come to mind. They're just using that as a platform with us. That's why a committee can be formed and nothing come of its results, nothing come of its findings in the first term, because you need to make sure that we support you for a second term. We're being strung along, and they need to be punished for that. We should withhold our voter power on that, but we should also compel them to tell the truth about our identity. Now is the time to hold their feet to the fire. We bring another issue in front of them, not just reparations. We show that we are even more disgruntled than before, and that their empty promises are insufficient. Election season works in our favor. I implore you to rise above that low vibrational mindset and take control of your existence. All right? You absolutely have a voice. The problem with your voice is that it lives on YouTube and does nothing in real life. You can't criticize Black Lives Matter for becoming a liberal white takeover, yet do nothing when our people are lynched by both law enforcement and private white citizens. You can't criticize either political party for not doing anything for you when you do nothing for yourself. You should be proud enough of the civil rights movement, waves 1 and 2, because that was you teaching the rest of the country how to speak truth to power and demand justice. You taught everyone else how to forcibly lay claim to your inalienable rights, not only as citizens, but as human beings. The LGBTQIA+ community followed your example for how to do it. Labor unions have been following your example for how to do it. Our previous generations are now notorious for raising hell, and our current generations do very little by comparison. Too many fabled leaders died fighting so you could have your voice, for you to now just throw it away just because you can't be bothered to do anything or because you've decided it's pointless. Listen, we are at war. They have never defeated us. We defeated ourselves. They didn't take nothing. We gave it to them. That's why we're still here. No battle is pointless. No true warrior abdicates his mission just because he doesn't see the point. This country has castrated and domesticated the fiercest people on the planet. It's time to get savage again. Quit making excuses and fight. Don't you dare let your petty disagreement with something you hear me say on this channel deter you from standing on the front lines where you belong. Suit up and lace your boots up. It's wartime. If they call you African, but you're Indian, you should have already joined the movement in another tab before the video ended. You already know what's at stake. You know what they did. You know who you are, and you should be scalping any nigga that get in the way. It takes 5 minutes of your time. This is lazy activism. This is couch potato advocacy. You not going nowhere. You not marching. Ain't no police trying to stop you. Be about something. Make a move. Tap this QR code on your phone or click the link in the description for the Unehiya Movement. If you're under 18 or if you don't live in the US, you can't sign the petition. But you can still support the movement by becoming a member. It's the easiest and realest thing any of us can do right now. Let's get real about Negro identity. We got a lot of work to do. Join now.